Imagine if you woke up as a park ranger for 7 days. Imagine going to bed in your home, the hum of the city outside, the warmth of your sheets. You close your eyes, you're not in your pajamas. You're wearing 15 pounds of tactical nylon. A badge pinned to your chest, a Glock 17 on your hip, and a radio that's screaming a code you don't recognize. You are now a park ranger in 200,000 acres of treacherous, unmapped wilderness. And you just realized the forest isn't what you're here to protect. You're here to make sure whatever is inside stays inside. Everyone thinks being a park ranger is about protecting nature. They're wrong. It's about keeping what's inside the forest from getting out. Let's talk about what that actually means. When most people picture a park ranger, they picture someone in a flat-brimmed hat pointing at a deer, maybe handing a map to a family from Ohio. That version exists. But it's one corner of something much larger and much stranger. The National Park Service manages over 85 million acres of land in the United States alone. 85 million. To give you a sense of scale, that is roughly the size of Germany, Austria and Switzerland combined, and most of it has no cell signal, no roads, and no witnesses. Your type is search and rescue. You are the person who goes in when everyone else comes out. When a hiker doesn't return to the trailhead by nightfall, when a child wanders off the trail during a family camping trip and 100 volunteers have searched for 18 hours and found nothing. That's when they call you. You know the terrain the way most people know their own neighborhoods, the false trails, the drop-offs, the places where the land folds in on itself and swallows sound whole. On the morning of your first day, you pour your coffee, lace up your boots and feel briefly, cleanly, like the luckiest person alive. That feeling is going to last about 36 hours. Day 1. The campsite. Your patrol covers roughly 200,000 acres of mixed conifer and alpine wilderness. It takes 2 full days to walk the perimeter on foot. In most places, the tree cover is so thick that aerial observation is useless. You can fly directly overhead and never see the ground. The morning patrol on day 1 is routine. You check 2 backcountry campsites, verify the permit register at the eastern trailhead, and radio in a position update every hour. The air smells like pine resin and cold water. A mule deer watches you from a ridge for almost a full minute before deciding you're uninteresting. The second campsite changes things. It's a designated backcountry site. Site 7, if you're going by the sector map. 3 rings of stones around a fire pit. A bear box mounted to a post. A flat clearing where 2 or 3 tents could fit comfortably. The tents are gone, but the food isn't. That's the first thing you notice, and the reason you stop walking and just stand there for a moment. A collapsible camp stove, still assembled. A pot with the lid on. An open bag of instant oatmeal on a flat rock beside it, the morning's portion already measured out. A tin cup with an inch of coffee in it, gone cold. Not the coffee of someone who left hours ago. The kind of cold that means a couple of hours at most. You radio it in. Describe what you see. The response is what you expected. Copy that. Anyone in your visual? No, no one in your visual. Check the registration. The registration log shows 2 permits issued for Site 7 last night, a couple from Portland. Experienced backcountry campers, the permit notes, previous visits on file, no incidents. You spend the next 90 minutes working outward in a spiral pattern. You find nothing. No footprints leading away from the site, which should be impossible because the soil around the fire ring is soft and holds prints beautifully. The prints simply stop. As if whoever was sitting at that camp stove stood up and evaporated. You tell yourself there's a rational explanation. Hikers sometimes do strange things. They panic, they argue, they leave in a hurry without thinking about their gear. They turn up at the trailhead embarrassed and slightly sunburned, and they collect their things the next morning. You log the site, you radio it forward, you keep walking, but you leave the oatmeal exactly where it is. You don't know why. It just feels wrong to touch it. That evening, back at the station, you sit with your report and notice something you almost missed. The bear box was closed and latched. Whoever left, however they left, took the time to secure the food storage. In the middle of whatever happened, you don't sleep particularly well that night. Day 2. The tracks. There's a thing they teach you in tracking. The difference between reading a trail and reading what the trail is trying to tell you. Footprints aren't just footprints, they're a record of weight distribution, of pace, of intention. Whether someone was walking or running, whether they knew where they were going or didn't. You're thinking about this on the morning of day 2 because you've been following a set of tracks for the last 40 minutes, and something about them is making the back of your neck feel strange. They're human tracks. Boots, medium-width sole, size 10 or 11 by the impression depth. Walking at a normal pace, your gait analysis training puts the stride length right in the average range for an adult male. Everything about them is textbook normal, except for where they're going. The trail curves northeast, through a section of the park that's technically accessible but rarely visited. Old-growth forest, dense enough that the canopy blocks most direct sunlight even in summer. The kind of place where it's always a little bit darker than you think it should be. The tracks move with purpose. Not wandering, purposeful. Whoever made them knew where they were headed. And then they go vertical. You stand at the base of a granite cliff face, maybe 60, 70 feet high, near vertical, and the tracks lead directly to it and stop. No deviation, no hesitation. The last print is 12 inches from the rock. There's nowhere to go but up. And the cliff offers no handholds, no ledges, nothing that a person without technical climbing equipment could navigate. You look up. Nothing. You look at the ground around the base of the cliff. No equipment, no gear, no rope, no sign that anyone stopped or turned. You photograph everything. You measure the stride length one more time, double-checking your arithmetic. You radio in, describe what you found, and then spend a long moment just looking at that last boot print. The soil is soft. The impression is clean. The heel is slightly deeper than the toe, which means the person was moving forward, into the cliff. Your supervisor's voice on the radio has the careful, neutral tone that means he's taking it seriously, but doesn't want to say so. Mark the location. We'll send someone up the top of that face tomorrow. See if there's anything on the other side. There isn't going to be anything on the other side. You know this the way you know things sometimes, without knowing why you know them. You walk back to your truck and you think about the word purposeful. You think about what it means to walk directly into a wall of rock like it isn't there. The explanation you keep reaching for never quite arrives. Day 3. The voice on the radio. You've been on the radio every day. Hourly position updates, trail condition reports, wildlife sightings. The radio is the thread that connects you to the rest of the world when you're 6 miles from the nearest road. You know what the radio sounds like. It's specific static, the slight delay on the repeater. The way your supervisor says copy, clipped, neutral, like he's conserving syllables for emergencies. What comes through on day 3 is not that. It's 14:22. You're eating lunch on a fallen log near the western boundary of your sector, watching a pair of ravens argue about something in a tree. The radio crackles, normal. Then a voice, your voice. Not like your voice, your voice. The exact timbre, the exact cadence, the way you slightly flatten your vowels on certain words, a speech pattern you only noticed when you heard a recording of yourself once and felt faintly embarrassed by it. The voice is saying your call sign. Then, I'm at, and a location. A grid reference. You recognize the format but not the place. It doesn't correspond to any location in your sector map. It doesn't correspond to any location in any park sector you're aware of. Then, please respond. I need assistance. Then static. You sit very still for what feels like a long time. You key your radio. Normal protocol. Dispatch. This is your call sign. Did you copy that last transmission? Pause. Copy. What transmission? A voice on this frequency, approximately 30 seconds ago. Sounded like a distress call. Another pause, longer this time. Your frequency is clear. We haven't received any transmissions in the last 10 minutes from your sector. You stare at your radio. The ravens are still arguing. Copy, you say. You eat the rest of your lunch. You are methodical about it. You pack up your wrapper, check your water level, consult your map. You do all of this with the calm, focused attention of someone who is very deliberately not thinking about what they just heard. But here is the thing about the human brain. It doesn't forget voices. It doesn't get confused about them. The voice recognition centers of the brain are ancient and precise, older than language, older than conscious thought. For millennia, recognizing the exact sound of a particular human voice was a survival skill, and your brain is telling you, with absolute certainty, that the voice in the radio was yours. That night you play back your own radio recordings from the day. You listen to yourself say, "Copy, heading northeast on Trail 4, and copy, no sign of wildlife in Sector 7. You listen to the vowels, the cadence. Then you sit in silence for a while. Then you check the door. But let's step back for a moment, because what you're experiencing, as strange as it is, isn't entirely unprecedented. There is a body of documented cases, thousands of them, that follows patterns startlingly similar to what you've seen in the last 3 days. Cases from national parks and wilderness areas across North America. Cases that don't have good explanations. The person who has catalogued them most extensively is a former law enforcement officer named David Paulides. He didn't set out to write a horror story. He was a former detective, systematic and methodical, and what he found, after years of filing Freedom of Information Act requests with the National Park Service, was a pattern. A specific, repeating, deeply anomalous pattern. People vanish in certain wilderness areas with unusual frequency. That alone isn't necessarily remarkable. The backcountry is dangerous and people do make fatal mistakes. But the cases Paulides highlighted share specific characteristics that separate them from ordinary wilderness accidents. The disappearances are often in areas that have just been searched, as if whatever takes people waits for the search teams to move on. The victims, when found, are sometimes located in terrain far more difficult than their fitness level would allow them to reach. Some are found at significantly higher elevations than where they vanished, despite those elevations being essentially unclimbable. Many are found without their shoes. The shoes are always somewhere else, never with the body. There is no consensus explanation for this. The conventional hypothesis is hypothermia, specifically a phenomenon called paradoxical undressing, where severe cold causes a malfunction in the hypothalamus that makes the brain believe the body is overheating. The victim tears off their clothing, sometimes just their shoes. That explains some cases. It does not explain all of them. It does not explain the ones found 10 miles from where they disappeared, in terrain that would have taken a healthy, equipped adult days to cross. It does not explain the ones found in places that the search teams had physically walked through hours before. The Park Service maintains that these cases are statistically unremarkable. That wilderness is dangerous and people make mistakes. The rangers who work those parks, the ones who've been on enough searches, who've read enough of the case files, tend to be quieter on the subject. You think about this as you lie in your bunk on the night of day 3. You think about the oatmeal, still in its measure on the flat rock. You think about the tracks that walked into solid granite. You think about your own voice asking for help from a place that doesn't exist. And you think, what am I keeping inside this forest? Day 4, the silence. You've been in quiet forests before. You know what quiet means in the backcountry. It means wind through pine needles, the tick of cooling rock in the afternoon sun, the distant knock of a woodpecker. It means the background hum of a living ecosystem going about its business. What you walk into at approximately 9:40 on day 4 is not that. You've been hiking for 2 hours, moving into a high valley on the eastern edge of your sector, an area marked on the old survey maps as the Hanging Basin. Glacier-carved, steep walls on 3 sides, a meadow at the base. It should be one of the most productive wildlife areas in the sector. And then the sound stops. Not gradually. The way sound fades when you go deeper into dense forest all at once, like crossing a threshold, like the moment after a door closes. No birds, no wind, no insects. The creek you've been following for the last mile, you can see it moving, maybe 30 feet away, but you cannot hear it. You watch the water slide over the rocks and wonder if you've suddenly gone deaf. You haven't. When you clap your hands, you hear it. When you speak, your voice comes back to you flat and directionless, like speaking in a padded room. You are in what the scientific literature calls an infrasound zone. Here's the physiology of it, because you need to understand it to understand what happens next. Infrasound is sound below the threshold of human hearing, below 20 Hz. You can't hear it, but your body can feel it. Certain geological formations, valleys with specific shapes, rock faces at particular angles, can act as resonance chambers for infrasound produced by wind, seismic activity, or other environmental sources. The result is a standing wave of sub-audible vibration that permeates the air in a defined area. And here is what infrasound does to the human body. It vibrates the eyeball. At around 18.98 Hz specifically, it resonates with the natural frequency of the human eye, causing peripheral visual disturbances, shapes in the edge of your vision. Things that aren't there. It stimulates the vagus nerve, triggering a deep, ancient, irrational sense of dread. Not fear of anything specific, just dread, pooling in your chest like cold water. And in sustained exposure, it can cause mild hallucinations, not the vivid kind, but the textural kind. The impression of something present, the certainty that you are not alone. All of this is documented. All of this is real. You know this because you were briefed on it during training, briefly, as a single bullet point in a slide about environmental hazards. The briefing did not prepare you for standing in the middle of it. You feel the vibration before you identify it. A low pressure against your sternum like the bass note of a speaker stack at a concert, except there's no music. Just the frequency. You feel it in your teeth. You feel it in the fluid of your inner ear. And then you see something at the edge of the meadow, in your peripheral vision. A shape. Tall. Still, you turn your head. Nothing there. You stand absolutely motionless for, you're not sure how long. Your watch says 4 minutes when you finally look at it, but it feels like 40. The shape doesn't come back when you look directly at the tree line. But the moment you look away, you feel it at the edge of your vision again. Patient, present, you leave the way you came, quickly but not running. You hold the not running together by force of will, step by step, until you've crossed back out of the valley and the sound rushes back in like water filling a space, the creek, the wind, a raven somewhere distant. You sit on a rock and breathe. You write in your field journal, hanging basin, 0940-944. Possible infrasound event. Recommend further investigation. Do not recommend solo entry. Then you add in smaller writing underneath, it was watching me leave. You almost cross that last line out. But you don't. Day 5. The staircase. There is a phenomenon in wilderness communities, passed between rangers and backcountry hikers and search and rescue volunteers in the way that certain stories always travel, sideways and half embarrassed. About staircases. Freestanding staircases. In the deep wilderness. Going nowhere. The first version of this story you ever heard was from a ranger 3 counties over at a resource management conference 2 years ago. He told it the way people tell true stories that they're slightly ashamed of, carefully with too many qualifiers. He'd found a staircase in the Gifford-Pinchot National Forest in Washington. Wooden, oak, he thought, from the color of it. Well made, wide enough for 2 people to walk abreast. The steps were worn in a way that suggested they'd been used. The center of each step slightly lower than the edges, the way a century of footsteps hollows stone or wood. It went up about 15 feet and ended in open air. No house, no structure, no foundation, except the stairs themselves, which were sunk into the ground at the base with what appeared to be purpose and care. No evidence of anything having been built nearby and later demolished. The forest around it was old growth, 200-year-old Douglas firs, that would have had to have been cleared for any significant structure to have existed there. He didn't go up the stairs. He said he didn't know why exactly. It wasn't fear, specifically. It was more like the instinct you get sometimes on a hiking trail when the trail looks fine and the weather is fine and your body is fine. But something says not today. He went back the next week with a colleague and a camera. He never found it again. On the afternoon of day 5, you find yours. You're not even looking for it. You've been following a wildlife survey grid, checking motion cameras, looking for sign of the wolf pack that's been ranging through the northwest corner of the sector. Routine work. The kind of work that makes you feel solid and purposeful. And then you step around a large boulder that's been deposited in the middle of an old-growth grove, glacial erratic, 2 stories high, granite. And there it is, oak. Just like the other ranger described. Wide steps, maybe 4 feet across, 15 steps, give or take, rising from the forest floor to a height of roughly 12 feet, where they end in empty mountain air. The banister. There is a banister, iron, slightly rusted, curves in a way that suggests quality craftsmanship. Someone built this to last. The trees around it are enormous, old. There is no way a structure that would have used this staircase could have existed here in living memory, possibly in several lifetimes of memory. You stand at the base for a long time. The ticking sound you noticed earlier is stronger here. You look around for its source and cannot find it. You photograph everything. You photograph the base of the staircase, the way the bottom posts are sunk into the soil, the way the soil has grown over the metal brackets, grasses threading through the ironwork over what must have been many years. You photograph the top step and the nothing at all above it. You do not go up the stairs. You tell yourself this is standard protocol. You don't know the structural integrity, you don't know the weight tolerance, and there is no reason, no operational reason, to climb a structurally uncertain staircase in the middle of a wilderness. These are all reasonable things. But when you turn your back on the staircase to photograph the surrounding forest, you have an experience that is harder to file under reasonable. You feel, with complete physical certainty, that the staircase is no longer empty behind you. You turn around. It's empty. The ticking has stopped. The third man. There is a concept in extreme survival psychology known as the third man factor. It was named loosely after a line in T.S. Eliot's poem The Waste Land, something about a third figure walking alongside you that when you turn isn't there. In the literature, it refers to a specific phenomenon reported by people in extreme survival situations. Mountaineers pinned by storms at high altitude. Solo sailors adrift in open ocean, polar explorers, castaways, people in the absolute outer edges of human endurance. They report a presence, a companion, a figure who walks beside them and, in many cases, gives them instructions. Turn left here, stop now, eat something, keep moving. The presence is not frightening. That's what every account emphasizes. It is not frightening. It is, in fact, profoundly comforting. Like being accompanied by someone who knows the terrain, the neurological explanation is elegant and depressing in equal measure. The brain, under sufficient stress and sensory deprivation, splits its own narrative voice. The internal monologue becomes external. The part of you that has survival knowledge, the pattern-recognizing, rote-finding, danger-assessing part, separates itself from the observing consciousness and presents itself as someone else. A guide, a guardian. Your brain gives you a friend when you need one most. You are not in an extreme survival situation. You are a trained ranger in a well-mapped sector with a functioning radio and enough food for 4 more days. You are not in the outer edges of anything. But on the afternoon of day 5, walking back from the staircase, you notice that you've been talking, out loud, to someone on your left. You stop. Look left. The forest. Afternoon light through pine needles. Nothing. You replay the last few minutes in your memory, the fragments of a conversation that you now realize was one-sided. You were describing the staircase, explaining what you thought it might mean, and something, your own voice, but not quite, was asking questions. How old do you think the iron is? Why would someone build something like that and leave it? Just your voice, asking you questions. Like someone walking beside you who was very, very interested. You stop walking and stand very still. I know, you say, out loud, to no one. The forest says nothing back. But the strange thing, the thing you write down in your journal that night and then close the journal without reading back, is that you're not frightened, not even slightly. You feel accompanied. Day 6, the encountery. You've read the case files on feral individuals. It comes up in backcountry law enforcement training. People who, for reasons of mental illness or deliberate choice or some combination of both, have made the deep wilderness their permanent home. Not hermits in the romantic sense, not Thoreau. People who have, over months or years, desocialized to the point where an encounter with another human being registers not as greeting, but as intrusion. There have been cases. A man in the Cascade Range who'd been living in a network of hand-dug shelters for an estimated 6 years before a trail crew stumbled across him. A woman found living in a camping equipment cache in a Canadian provincial park who had no recollection of her previous life and became violent when approached. There's a recorded incident, it's in the NPS internal records, though not the public ones, of a backcountry ranger being followed for 11 miles through dense forest by a person she never saw directly, only heard, always at the same distance, always matching her pace. You think about this at 7:15 on day 6, watching the tree line from the station porch, because something moved in the wrong way. That's the only way to describe it. The movement was wrong. It was at the edge of the timber, maybe 200 yards out. At that distance, in morning shadow, you get shape and motion and not much else. What you saw, what you think you saw, was tall, human in proportion, standing at the edge of the tree line in the flat, still way that animals stand when they're watching something. Except it moved wrong. Animals have a vocabulary of motion that you learn after enough time in the field, the way you learn a language, not consciously but thoroughly. Deer move like deer. Bears move like bears. There's a quality to the movement of any animal you might mistake for a human at distance. A weight distribution, a hesitation, a specific relationship between the body and the ground that identifies them once you've seen it enough times. What you saw moved with the weight distribution of a human. But the joints were wrong. The relationship between the movement of the upper and lower body, the way the torso stayed eerily still while the legs adjusted, was wrong. It reminded you of something you couldn't quite identify until it moved again. A spider. The way a spider moves, the torso steady, the legs repositioning underneath it with that uncanny, deliberate precision. 200 yards. Morning shadow. Maybe 30 seconds of observation before it stepped backward into the timber and was gone. You sit with your coffee for a while, then you radio in. Dispatch, this is call sign. I have a possible contact at grid reference. You read off the coordinates, requesting verification of any permitted campers or other personnel in sector northwest of station. Pause. Negative. You are the only personnel in northwest sector. Copy. You go inside and lock the door. Then you feel slightly ridiculous about locking the door. Then you leave it locked. The rest of day 6 is quiet. Too quiet in the regular way rather than the hanging basin way, just the ordinary absence of incident that makes you alert precisely because you've been waiting for something. At dusk, you find a single boot print in the soft soil beside the station. Size 10 or 11. The same tread pattern you tracked 2 days ago, pointing toward the station, not away from it. You sit at the table in the station kitchen with a map and your journal and your radio, and you do the math, quietly, that you've been avoiding doing. The missing campers. The tracks that ended at a cliff. Your own voice from a place that doesn't exist. The dead zone in the hanging basin. The staircase and whatever wasn't on it. The thing that moved like a spider at the tree line. You write a single line in your journal. Something in this forest knows I'm here. Then, underneath it, and I think I'm starting to understand why I'm not supposed to leave. Day 7, the choice. Help arrives on the morning of day 7. A relief ranger, standard rotation, nothing unusual, drives up to the station at 7 in a green F-250 with 2 weeks of supplies and the easy, grounded energy of someone who slept well in a real bed the night before. He shakes your hand. He has coffee in a good thermos. He wants to talk about the Seahawks. You stand in the doorway and look at him and feel something that takes a moment to identify. You feel reluctant, not afraid, not confused. Reluctant, like a person being asked to leave a conversation before it's finished. You hand him the station keys and your patrol logs and a careful, accurate account of your week. The abandoned campsite, the anomalous tracks, the radio incident, the infrasound event at the hanging basin, the staircase, the possible contact at the tree line. You describe all of it in the careful, neutral language of official reporting. He listens with the focused attention of a good field officer and then says quietly, "Yeah, Northeast Sector does that." You look at him. Does what? He considers this for a moment, like he's deciding how much to say. Gets under your skin. There are sectors like this. I've worked 3 of them over 15 years. Something about the geology maybe, or the way the ridgelines interact with the weather, or maybe something else. The reports all sound like yours. What do you do with the reports? File them. Move on. come back to a different sector. And the people, the missing ones, some of them turn up, some of them don't. And you look back at the forest. The morning light is doing something extraordinary to the mist in the valley below, turning it gold from the inside like a lamp shining through fabric. It is genuinely, objectively beautiful. Have you ever felt like it wanted you to stay? You ask. He's quiet for a long moment. Every time, he says, the drive out. You drive out on the gravel access road for 40 minutes before you hit pavement. You have a good radio signal by mile 15. Your phone reconnects to civilization somewhere around mile 22, and you get a cascade of notifications, messages, emails, the ordinary noise of the world. And you look at them and feel briefly like an alien examining artifacts. You stop at a gas station on the highway. You buy a coffee that is objectively terrible and drink half of it standing in the parking lot, looking at the mountains. Here is what you know. You know that the human brain is extraordinary at pattern recognition and terrible at distinguishing genuine patterns from imagined ones, especially under stress, especially in isolation. You know that infrasound is a real phenomenon with documented psychological effects. You know that paradoxical undressing explains some, but not all of the cases in those missing person files. You know that the staircase had a rational explanation. Historical structure, removed structure, property history, and you simply didn't have access to enough information to reconstruct it. You know all of this. You also know what you heard on the radio. You know what you tracked to the base of that cliff face. You know what you saw moving at the tree line. And here is the thing that you cannot explain away, the thing that sits at the center of all of it like a stone in still water. You were not frightened. Not properly frightened. Not in the way you should have been. There was a version of this week that should have felt threatening and wrong from start to finish, and there were moments of genuine fear. The radio voice, the boot print outside the station. But underneath those moments was something else. A quality of attention, as if the forest was curious about you specifically. As if you'd been selected for observation rather than harm. You think about the third man. About the voice on your left, asking you questions about the staircase. About what it means that your own brain generated a companion, and that the companion was more interested in the forest than in getting you out of it. You finish the bad coffee. You think, I found something out there. And I don't know what it was, but I know it wasn't finished with me. And then, this is the part you never tell anyone, because there's no clean way to explain it. As you're getting back into your truck, you notice something on the passenger seat. You didn't put it there. It's a small object. Smooth, grey, river-rounded stone. The kind you find in any creek bed in any mountain range. Except this one has been carved. Not recently. The carving is worn smooth, almost indistinguishable from the natural texture of the rock.
When you hold it up to the light and turn it, you can just make out the form. A staircase, rising from the bottom of the stone to the top edge. Going nowhere. Going everywhere. You set it down very carefully on the passenger seat. You drive home. You don't throw it away. Epilogue, what the forest knows. There are 85 million acres of managed wilderness in the United States. Billions more globally. Most of it has never been meaningfully studied. Most of it has never had a human being spend the night within 10 miles of it. We have named it. We have put it on maps. We have built trails to its edges and charged admission to walk near it, and put regulations on what you can take from it and what you must leave behind. But we have not understood it. Not really. The rangers who work the deep sectors, the ones who stay long enough and go far enough and pay enough attention, they know something that doesn't fit neatly into a field report. They know that the wilderness is not simply the absence of civilization. It is not a blank canvas that becomes meaningful only when humans arrive. It has its own architecture, its own memory, its own, slow, enormous attention. What lives in it, beyond the animals, beyond the documented species, beyond the cataloged and classified, we don't know. And I mean that not as a horror, not as a threat, but as a statement of plain fact. We don't know? The history of science is a history of discovering that the world contains more than we thought, and that the categories we invented to understand it were always slightly too small. Maybe the things that don't fit the reports are nothing. Infrasound and pattern recognition, and the tricks that isolation plays on a trained human mind. Maybe, or maybe this, you went into the forest as a guardian. And the forest decided, in whatever slow, enormous way it makes decisions, to let you see a little of what you were actually guarding. Not a threat. A disclosure. Come back sometime. The oatmeal is still